This first hour is brought to you courtesy of my good friend Ravi of Critical Cosmetics, 220kminc.com. It is entirely responsible for the gleam in my complexion, and you should see my wife. In fact, she's so beautiful now, thanks to Ravi's concoctions, that I can't put her on the screen for fear someone will take her away from me. All joking aside, the food that has spun off, or maybe it's the other way around, from Critical Cosmetics is now also available, and there's free shipping to the United States, Canada, Europe, the United Kingdom, and Australia, as long as you buy 2 products or more. And if you look at their website, I assure you, you definitely will. As I said in the menu section, it's another disaster with firearms in America. A manager at Walmart, whether on shift or off shift, I don't know, whether disgruntled or apparently happy with his workplace, I don't know. All I know is that multiple people are dead, a larger number are wounded. It's another disaster in the United States of America. The non-binary man who calls himself Mix instead of Mr., who gunned down revelers in a gay nightclub a night or two before, is also a story that has faded from the news. And it has faded because it will soon be superseded, as the Walmart shooting will be. The United States is the sick man of North America. In fact, it's the sick man of the world. And I would feel deep sympathy for the people of the United States if they weren't projecting their force everywhere else in the world, trying to govern other people's countries. A country where 3% of the population of the world live, but 25% of the world's prisoners are incarcerated. A country divided by racial and class and ethnic oppression on a gigantic scale, such that it can be described as a volcano waiting to blow, is nonetheless spending more money just in Ukraine than most other countries in the world put together spend on their entire defense. A defense budget in the Pentagon bigger than the next 10 countries put together, spending more just in Ukraine, much more than the entire military budget of Russia, citing its nuclear weapons around the world, seeking to be the lawman, the sheriff of the world, when it cannot keep the peace in its own supermarkets. It cannot police its own clubs. It is not through any feeling of schadenfreude that I bring you these explanations of how I'm feeling about the United States this evening. I bleed for the suffering of the people shot down, the people wrongfully imprisoned, incarcerated, put to work in the military-industrial complex or the prison-industrial complex of the United States. It's not out of any pleasure I highlight the fact that the racial division in America is a powder keg and getting more and more dangerous. It is a plea, rather, for the United States to stay home and clean house, for the United States to sort its own problems, to enrich and unite its own people and leave the rest of us alone. Because make no mistake, on this bitterly cold November evening, Europe is facing economic catastrophe as a result of following American orders in the Ukraine, as a result of destroying its own economy for the edification of the United States of America, as a result of following the old man, 80 years young, wherever he wanted to go, even if where he wanted to go was entirely the opposite of where we as Europeans ought to go. Vital European infrastructure has been exploded on the orders of the United States of America. Sanctions have been imposed, which turned out to be sanctions upon ourselves rather than the country, Russia, that they were supposed to be being imposed on. Our currency is bust, while the ruble is booming, the best performing currency in 2022. Imagine. A war which began on the 25th of February shows no signs of ending. And that's because the United States, at least until now, has no intention of seeing it end. A war which is now accompanied by videotaped and photographed atrocities, war crimes being committed by a regime in Kiev that we are bankrolling, that we are arming, and that we are, however increasingly unsteadily, with an uncertain note, proselytizing and propagandizing for on every news bulletin. The only way that the mass media in the West can continue to support Ukraine is not to report it, not to report what's happening, because what's happening is a picture of certain defeat for the forces of the coup regime in Kiev and increasingly desperate, bestial acts of atrocity by that regime. They videotaped themselves executing Russian prisoners of war lying on the ground, and they put it onto the internet. Men lying helpless with their hands stretched out were all shot in the back of the head. The Kraken division, a fascist breakaway from the Azov battalion, even more bestial than the original fascists of Azov, and as beholden to the collaborators of the Holocaust in the East, the people who piled the Jews of Eastern Ukraine and Western Ukraine into death pits and walked on their backs, administrating the coup de grace in the back of their heads. The Kraken division executed in cold blood ordinary civilians in the Kharkiv region just this week as alleged collaborators. No trial, of course, no justice, of course, just Russian people who speak Russian, like almost all of the people of Eastern Ukraine do. These war crimes will never be punished. They will never even be described as war crimes. That language is kept for our official enemies, as has been displayed so vividly on the international stage at the World Cup this week. I could speak all night about the rampant hypocrisy that is on view. I just saw a black woman commentator on Britain's state mouthpiece, the BBC, a woman by the name of Alex Scott, MBE, a former gifted woman footballer with the Arsenal Football Club, at the end of a tirade about human rights abuses in Qatar, saying, we hope at the next World Cup we won't have to have these conversations again. No, Alex, you definitely will not have these conversations again. You will not, 4 years hence, if God spares us all, be heard talking about the 25% of the world's prisoners that are held in America's prisons, even though the World Cup will be in America. We will not be told that the biggest portion of them, Alex, are people who look like you, whose skin color is the same as yours. You will not be talking about the chain gangs of black prisoners in the United States of America. You will not be talking about the gunning down of partygoers at gay clubs. You will not be talking about the massacres in the malls all over the United States of America. You will definitely not be talking about the 50 countries that America has invaded or overturned in the years since the end of the Second World War. I promise you, you will not be talking about any of that. You will not be talking about the extreme injustices of the US injustice system. You won't say a word about it. Qatar is nothing to do with me. I'm banned from Qatar. I'm not here shilling for Qatar. I have zero relations with Qatar. But my goodness, are they being traduced in this World Cup? Because they don't allow people to stagger around drunk in the streets of Qatar. A fact which was known by FIFA and the world that is represented at FIFA when they granted the World Cup to Qatar in the first place. Gay sex is not legal in Qatar, as it isn't in any Muslim country in the world, as it isn't in any but one African country in the world, as it isn't particularly popular in Poland, where 300 mayors have just declared their towns to be LGBTQ plus free, and yet we're shipping money and weapons to Poland. We're citing American nuclear weapons in Poland, the better with which to threaten Russia. This hypocrisy is utterly sick. It means that the World Cup should not be in any Muslim country. Why don't you come out and say that? It means that the World Cup cannot be in any African country. It means that the World Cup's not that popular in Alabama and in other states of the United States, that only until very recently gay relations were illegal. The hypocrisy over the rainbow bands is beginning to beggar belief. Every single football broadcast on ITV and BBC in Britain begins with and is punctuated at half time with attacks on the organisers, Qatar. I even had someone say to me today how dreadful it is that some games start at 10 o'clock in the morning. I'll tell you what, why don't we hold the World Cup every 4 years in Greenwich? Then we can watch it at Greenwich Mean Time, and it can be not the World Cup, but the Anglo-Sphere Cup. If you're going to hold the tournament in other parts of the world, you have to know that, well, it's not the same time here as it is there. The way in which Islam, Muslims, Arabs are being disrespected in the way in which this World Cup is being reported. I'm listening to people who are multi-millionaires at the public's expense, pretending to care about migrant workers, pretending to care about the wages of manual labor that was paid to those who built the stadia. But they have never, in their entire multi-millionaire puff, given a moment's support to any workers anywhere else in the world fighting for higher wages, including in Britain, where this very morning the leader of the Railway Workers Union was insulted beyond anything I have ever seen on British television. Not by the right-wing Fox News, GB News, Sky News, Rupert Murdoch News, but by the achingly liberal Channel 4 News, where the newsreader, for that's all that he is, said that the leader of the Railway Workers Union had stolen Christmas. He was the Grinch that had stolen Christmas. Lynch the Grinch, they called him. Now, quite apart from the fact there are other ways to travel other than train in Britain, at least for now, despite the high cost of fuel, it's not the railway workers that have stolen Christmas. It's the British government and the British economic system which has stolen Christmas. The reason the people of Britain are facing a Christmas poorer than they have ever been and facing a more uncertain economic future than they ever have is nothing to do with the woman that sweeps your railway station. It's nothing to do with the man that's the guard on your train. It's nothing to do with the RMT or Mick Lynch. He's not the Grinch that stole Christmas. That was Boris Johnson. That was Rishi Sunak. That was whatever her name was, who came in between them. That was Joe Biden that stole our Christmas. That was Emmanuel Macron and little soldier Schultz. They're the people that have stolen our Christmas, not the railway workers. Now, there's one other thing I want to talk about. It is this. We've got, by the way, one of our most eminent guests coming up right after me, and that's Larry Johnson, a veteran of the CIA and the State Department, who will be talking to us about war and peace. But the other thing I wanted to talk about was China. China is the rising sun. It is simply unconscionable for some in the West that the sun is coming up like thunder out of China, across the bay, across the world. It is intolerable to the United States of America that whatever they do, whatever restrictions and sanctions they do or encourage others to do, however often they try to hamstring the rising Chinese economy, however they try to divide the people of China on religious or ethnic or geographical bases, they have completely failed. The AUKUS military alliance, the Indo-Pacific maneuvers of Western navies, the rocketing number of military bases that the United States has placed around China, the increasingly desperate efforts to provoke war with China over Taiwan, the desperate efforts to derail the absorption into the motherland of the former British colony of Hong Kong, they have all failed. They tried. They told you just a few weeks ago there had been a military coup in China. They told you that the president of China was no more and was to be replaced by a general. It is unhinged, the propaganda offensive against China, and it has all failed. China rises and rises and rises. We had a choice to rise with it. We could have bathed in the warmth of that rising sun. We could have been its supplier of high-tech components. We could have sold it luxury goods. We could have sold it the things that we still make and have, which are good things to make and have. We could have traded with China. China could have invested in us. We could have risen together. But our leaders, our idiot leaders, have chosen a path instead of war and confrontation, of sanctions and slander against the emerging Eurasian landmass that is going to be the future of humankind in the 21st and 22nd centuries. It is a very great pity. It may be too late to turn back. Certainly there are no signs yet that our people have realized that we're led by people who are not just knaves, but fools. Fasten your seatbelts. It's definitely going to be a bumpy night because it's the mother of all talk shows.